Millionaire discovers 10-year-old orphan in his garden. Boy says, "I'm waiting for my angel." The winter wind howled through the manicured gardens of Blake Manor as Ethan Blake stood frozen at his study window. Through the swirling snow, a small figure huddled beneath his prized maple tree, a boy, no more than 10, wearing a threadbare jacket in the bitter December cold. But it wasn't the boy's presence that sent a chill down Ethan's spine, it was his response when asked why he was there. "I'm waiting for my angel," the child whispered, his eyes filled with unwavering faith. "Mom promised they'd find me here." In that moment, something within Ethan's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Hey there, beautiful souls! Drop a quick comment with your location and hit that like button before watching. Let's create a global connection while exploring this touching story together. At 35, Ethan Blake embodied every business magazine's definition of success. His penthouse overlooking Central Park, fleet of luxury cars, and billion-dollar tech company painted the perfect picture of the American dream. Society pages dubbed him the Golden Bachelor, but few knew the darkness that lurked beneath his carefully polished exterior. 25 years ago, he was just another number in the foster care system. Child 2847, a label that still haunted his dreams. His earliest memory wasn't of birthday parties or family dinners, but of clutching a worn teddy bear in a crowded group home, watching other children leave with their new families while he remained behind. The bear was long gone, but the scars remained, carefully hidden behind designer suits and corporate acquisitions. Ethan had built his empire on cybersecurity, protecting others from the vulnerabilities he knew all too well. His company, SecureFlow, started in a cramped apartment with nothing but determination and ramen noodles. Now it protected the data of Fortune 500 companies, and his signature appeared on checks with more zeros than he'd ever imagined possible. But success came with a price. Trust didn't come naturally to someone who'd learned early that attachments meant inevitable abandonment. His relationships were calculated, temporary arrangements that never threatened the walls he'd built. His executive assistant had worked with him for 8 years and still didn't know his birthday. His board members whispered about his ruthless efficiency, how he could terminate long-term employees without blinking. They called him the machine behind his back. The irony wasn't lost on him. The unwanted child had become the man everyone wanted to know. Charity galas fought for his appearances, women left their numbers with waiters at his regular restaurants, and business partners courted his attention like desperate suitors. Yet every night he returned to an empty penthouse, its pristine rooms echoing with a silence that felt increasingly suffocating. His only real indulgence was his garden. The sprawling rooftop oasis featured rare plants from around the world, each carefully tended by his own hands. It was the one place he allowed himself to be vulnerable, to remember the small boy who once planted seeds in a paper cup at the group home, hoping they would grow roots before he had to move again. The media painted him as a modern-day Midas, but they missed the cruel twist. Everything he touched turned to gold, but nothing touched his heart. He'd created a fortress of wealth and influence, yet remained its sole prisoner. His calendar was full of meetings, but devoid of meaningful connections. His phone constantly buzzed with messages, but none that asked how he was really doing. Each December, as the city transformed into a winter wonderland, Ethan retreated further into himself. The holiday season, with its emphasis on family and tradition, served as an annual reminder of everything he'd built his life to forget. He doubled his charitable donations during this time, not out of generosity, but as a calculated move to keep the press occupied and his own demons at bay. On the surface, Ethan Blake had everything. His face graced magazine covers, his words moved markets, and his signature could change lives. But in the quiet moments when the city slept and his empire stood still, he was still that little boy with the teddy bear, watching others find their happy endings while he remained alone. This was who Ethan Blake was on that fateful December evening, a man who had conquered the business world but remained a stranger to his own heart. A man who had everything and nothing. A man who was about to have his carefully constructed world turned upside down by a small boy in a threadbare jacket, waiting in his garden for an angel who might just wear a designer suit. Samuel "Sammy" Martinez had learned early that life rarely matched the fairy tales his mother once read to him. At 10 years old, his world was confined to the imposing walls of Sunshine Children's Care Center, a Victorian mansion where peeling paint masked darker secrets beneath its respectable facade. His slight limp, the result of a birth defect that left his right leg weaker than his left, made him less adoptable, according to whispered conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. Prospective parents would smile politely during visits, their eyes lingering a moment too long on his uneven gait before choosing other children. But it wasn't his disability that kept him awake at night, it was the memory of his 6-year-old sister Emma's screams as they were separated 8 months ago. It's just temporary, the social workers had promised, their practiced smiles never reaching their eyes. Emma needs specialized care. That was the last time he saw his sister, though he kept her pink hair ribbon tucked safely in his shoe, the only piece of her he had left. Their mother, Maria Martinez, had been a housekeeper for wealthy families, working double shifts to provide for her children. She'd taught them dignity couldn't be measured in dollars, and love was worth more than gold. But one winter night, everything changed. A valuable necklace went missing from an employer's home. Despite her protests of innocence, Maria was arrested. The justice system moved swiftly for the wealthy victim, less so for a single immigrant mother who could barely afford a public defender. At Sunshine Care Center, Sammy quickly learned the unwritten rules. Director Victoria Wells ran the facility with a smile for donors and a steel fist for residents. Children who asked too many questions about missing files or late-night special adoptions found themselves transferred to facilities far away. Those who cooperated got extra desserts and coveted privileges. He survived by becoming invisible, watching and waiting. His disability became an unexpected advantage. People tended to dismiss him, speaking freely as if he weren't there. He learned to read upside-down documents on desks, to interpret whispered conversations in hallways, to piece together the puzzle of what really happened to some of the children who disappeared in the night. The other kids called him Ghost, partly for his quiet nature, partly for his habit of appearing in unexpected places. What they didn't know was that he was gathering information, building a mental map of the center's secrets. Every night after lights out, he would whisper to Emma through the heating vent, pretending she could hear him wherever she was, updating her on his progress. His most precious possession was a worn photo of their mother, smiling in front of their old apartment building. On the back, she'd written in her careful hand, "Never lose faith, me angel. Love finds a way." It was her last gift before being led away in handcuffs, clutching it to his chest as child services separated him from Emma. The privileged world outside Sunshine's gates seemed as distant as the moon. Through the center's windows, Sammy watched chauffeur-driven cars and designer-clad pedestrians pass by, oblivious to the darkness lurking behind the respectable facade. He'd overheard enough to know that some of the city's most prominent names were linked to the center's special adoption program, though he didn't fully understand what that meant. Winter was the hardest time. The old building's heating system struggled against the cold, and extra blankets were considered privileges to be earned. But it was also when his mother's words rang strongest in his memory. Angels appear when we need them most, my amor. You just have to believe. So when he discovered the document with Emma's transfer location tucked in Director Wells' desk, he knew he had to act. The address led to the wealthy district, near a mansion with a garden his mother once described from her housekeeping days. Like paradise on earth, she'd said, with trees that touched the sky. Now, watching the snow fall through the barred windows of Sunshine Care Center, Sammy clutched his mother's photo and made a decision. He wasn't just an unwanted boy with a limp anymore, he was his sister's last hope. And somewhere in that garden, he believed, an angel was waiting. New York City in winter was a tale of two cities. While the wealthy retreated to heated penthouses and exclusive clubs, the less fortunate struggled against bitter winds and frozen hopes. Between these worlds stood institutions like Sunshine Children's Care Center, bridges that too often became barriers, where good intentions paved roads to hidden hells. The system was a maze of contradictions. Charity galas raised millions for child welfare, yet budget cuts left social workers drowning in cases. Politicians posed with orphans during campaigns, then slashed funding once elected. Local news celebrated heartwarming adoptions while ignoring the darker statistics: aging out, abuse, trafficking. It was easier to share success stories than investigate why so many children vanished from the system's labyrinthine records. Society's elite viewed children's charities as social currency. Names on donor walls bought influence and respectability. The annual Sunshine Center Christmas Gala was a must-attend event where the city's powerful networked over champagne while pledging support for children they'd never meet. Director Victoria Wells expertly played this game, turning philanthropic guilt into generous donations, all while running what some whispered was the city's most efficient human trafficking operation. The police had their own willful blindness. Missing children from broken homes rarely warranted thorough investigations. Tips about suspicious adoptions were buried under bureaucratic paperwork. Officers learned quickly that questioning certain powerful families' interests could end careers. The thin blue line became thinner when green got involved. Local media maintained the facade. Feel-good stories about successful adoptions dominated coverage, while investigations into system abuse mysteriously lost funding. Reporters who dug too deep found themselves reassigned or unemployed. But the public preferred heartwarming tales to heartbreaking truths. The legal system played its part in the charade. Overworked public defenders couldn't match private law firms' resources. Judges, many owing their appointments to the same power brokers involved with Sunshine Center, ruled predictably. Cases like Maria Martinez's were processed quickly, sacrificial lambs maintaining the illusion of justice. Winter amplified these disparities. While luxury stores displayed holiday extravagance, homeless shelters turned away desperate families. Emergency rooms filled with hypothermia cases, while penthouses hosted holiday parties. The city's wealth gap was never more visible than during December's cruel contrast between opulence and desperation. Social services operated in perpetual crisis. Underfunded and understaffed, agencies relied increasingly on private institutions like Sunshine Center. Oversight became a checkbox exercise. Complaints disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The system designed to protect society's most vulnerable had become its greatest threat. Corporate involvement added another layer of complexity. Tech companies like SecureFlow provided surveillance systems to track troubled youth, while their CEOs donated to prevention programs. The irony of profiting from both causing and solving social problems was lost in board meetings and shareholder reports. The wealthy districts existed in carefully maintained isolation. Private security kept uncomfortable realities at bay. Gardens like Ethan Blake's rooftop paradise created artificial sanctuaries above the city's struggles. Yet even these fortresses couldn't completely shut out the growing shadows below. Underground networks thrived in this environment. Corrupt officials, compromised care workers, and criminal organizations formed sophisticated operations disguised as legitimate adoption services. Children became commodities, their futures traded in luxury offices, far from the streets they once called home. The public remained largely oblivious, comfortable in their ignorance. Occasional scandals surfaced but were quickly buried under celebrity news and political drama. Society's collective conscience was soothed by token gestures, holiday donations, volunteer days, social media awareness campaigns that changed nothing. This was the world Sammy and Ethan inhabited from opposite sides, a system where power protected power, where truth hid behind charity galas and press releases, where best interests of the child became a hollow phrase in legal documents. A world where a boy's disappearance could be explained away with paperwork, and a man's wealth could buy silence but not peace. As December's darkness descended on the city, these parallel universes were about to collide in one man's rooftop garden. The carefully maintained illusions of both worlds would soon shatter, revealing that sometimes the greatest acts of justice come from the most unlikely alliances. The evening Ethan Blake found Sammy in his garden began like any other December night. Snow fell silently on Manhattan's skyline as he reviewed quarterly projections in his penthouse study. The security system's subtle chime drew his attention to the monitor movement detected in the rooftop garden. Probably another ambitious paparazzo, he thought, reaching for his phone to call security. The garden's surveillance feed showed footprints in the fresh snow, leading to his prized Japanese maple. But instead of a photographer with a telephoto lens, he saw a small figure huddled against the trunk, arms wrapped tightly around knees. A child in weather that had weathermen warning people to stay indoors. "Send Harrison up," he instructed his security team, already pulling on his coat. Something about the scene triggered long-buried memories. Another boy, another winter, another desperate search for shelter. The bitter wind hit him as he stepped onto the rooftop. Snow crunched under his Italian leather shoes as he approached the tree. The boy didn't move, didn't even look up. Close up, Ethan could see he was shivering violently in a jacket too thin for summer, let alone a winter storm. "This is private property," Ethan said, his businessman's voice automatically engaging. "How did you get up here?" The boy finally looked up. His face was pale except for wind-burned cheeks, but his eyes, those eyes, held something that made Ethan's carefully constructed walls waver. Not fear or defiance, but a strange, steady certainty. The service elevator, the boy answered simply, his teeth chattering. "I'm sorry, sir. I needed to wait here." Harrison arrived, security radio crackling. "Should I call the police, Mr. Blake?" The boy's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't move. There was something oddly familiar about his features, like a face from a half-forgotten dream. "Wait here," Ethan told Harrison. He crouched down, meeting those unsettling eyes. "Wait for what?" "My angel," the boy's voice was barely a whisper. "Mom said they'd find me in the garden with the trees that touch the sky." A memory stirred a housekeeper from years ago, admiring this very garden. She'd called it paradise. He'd fired her over a missing necklace that later turned up behind a dresser. What was her name? "Your mother sent you here?" Ethan asked, noting the slight irregularity in the boy's posture, the way he favored one leg. Not exactly, the boy pulled something from his pocket, a creased photograph. "But she promised if I believed hard enough." His voice trailed off as another violent shiver shook his small frame. Ethan glanced at the photo. A woman's smiling face struck him like a physical blow. Maria Martinez, the housekeeper. The necklace. The hasty accusations. The police he'd called without a second thought. Mr. Blake, Harrison prompted. The police. Snow was falling harder now. The boy's lips were taking on a bluish tinge. Calling the police was the proper procedure. They'd handle it, take the child back wherever he belonged. One phone call and this wouldn't be his problem. But those eyes kept holding his, full of that inexplicable faith. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered, "What if someone had shown you mercy that night you ran away from the group home?" "No police," Ethan heard himself say. "Not yet. Harrison, have MS. Chen, prepare the guest suite and bring up hot chocolate. And find some warm clothes that might fit our visitor." Sir Harrison's surprise was evident. In 15 years, Ethan had never deviated from security protocols. "Just do it," Ethan shrugged off his cashmere coat, wrapping it around the shivering boy. "What's your name, kid?" "Sammy," the boy whispered, drowning in the expensive wool. "Sammy Martinez." The name hit Ethan like a second blow. What had he just gotten himself into? Inside his penthouse, Ethan watched as Sammy clutched the hot chocolate mug with trembling hands. The boy seemed impossibly small in the oversized chair, dwarfed by borrowed sweatpants and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most families' monthly rent. MS. Chen hovered nearby, her usually stoic expression softened with concern. "The guest suite is ready, Mr. Blake," she reported, then hesitated. "Should I prepare a proper meal?" "He looks hungry," Ethan finished, noting the hollow cheeks and sharp angles. "Yes, something simple. Soup, maybe." Sammy's eyes darted between them, alert despite his exhaustion. There was an intelligence there that belied his years, a wariness that seemed painfully familiar. "You worked here," the boy said suddenly, looking at MS Chen. "5 years ago, you used to give my mother extra sandwiches when she worked late." MS Chen's hand flew to her mouth. Maria's boy. But she. It was arrested. Ethan cut in, his guilt surfacing again. For a theft that wasn't her fault. Sammy's grip tightened on the mug. "You remember her?" "I do." Ethan sat across from him, maintaining a careful distance, "and I owe her an apology. But right now I need to understand why you're here. Are you in some kind of trouble?" A shadow crossed the boy's face. "I can't go back to Sunshine Center. Please?" Things happen there. Bad things." "The children's home on 82nd MS, Chen asked. "But it has such a good reputation." "Reputations can lie," Sammy said quietly, with a wisdom no child should possess, like the necklace Mom supposedly stole. The accusation hung in the air. Ethan felt its weight, saw the judgment in MS Chen's eyes. He deserved it. "They separated us," Sammy continued, his voice cracking. "Said Emma needed special care, but I found the papers. They sold her, like they sell other kids, to people with lots of money and special tastes." The implications turned Ethan's stomach. "That's a serious accusation." "That's why I had to find you." Sammy pulled out a crumpled paper from his sock. "Mom always said you were a good man who made one mistake, that you protected people with your company. And when I saw your name on the donor list..." Ethan took the paper, a torn piece of letterhead with an address and a list of names, his own among them, though he'd never authorized any donation to Sunshine Center. "I figured," Sammy's voice dropped to a whisper, "if anyone could help find Emma and prove what they're doing, it would be someone powerful enough to not be afraid of them. Someone who might want to make up for past mistakes." The manipulation was subtle but masterful. This child had survived by learning to read people, to push the right buttons. In another life, he'd make an excellent negotiator. But there was also raw desperation in those eyes, and something else, that same unwavering faith from the garden, as if he truly believed Ethan was the angel his mother had promised. "EMS. Chen cleared her throat. "Mr. Blake, if what he's saying is true..." "Then we're already involved," Ethan finished. He'd spent years building walls to keep the world out. Now a 10-year-old boy had found a crack in his defenses, armed with nothing but truth and trust. "I should call the authorities," he said, more to himself than others. "They won't help," Sammy replied softly. "They never do. That's why Mom said sometimes angels have to wear different disguises." In the silence that followed, Ethan could almost hear his carefully ordered world beginning to crumble. A sharp knock interrupted the tense silence. Harrison's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Blake, NYPD's in the lobby. Sunshine Center reported a missing child. They have surveillance photos of him entering the building." Sammy's face went pale, the mug trembling in his hands. MS Chen instinctively moved closer to him, her protective instinct overriding professional distance. This incredible soul deserves a small gesture for his brave heart. Sadly, no one has tapped that button yet. Be the first to support Ethan's life-changing moment. Ethan's mind raced through scenarios. The proper course was clear: hand the boy over, let the system handle it. His reputation, his company, his entire life was built on following proper procedures. One wrong move could destroy everything. "They'll send me to a worse place," Sammy whispered, his composure finally cracking. Director Wells said, "That's what happens to children who know too much. Please, I just need time to prove what I'm saying." The security feed showed 2 police officers in the lobby, accompanied by a well-dressed woman Ethan recognized from charity galas Victoria Wells herself. Her perfectly practiced, concerned expression couldn't quite mask the predatory intensity in her eyes. Mr. Blake Harrison prompted again. "They're insisting on coming up." Ethan looked at the boy, seeing not just Sammy but shadows of himself at that age, desperate, alone, making one last gamble on human kindness. He saw Maria Martinez being led away in handcuffs because he hadn't bothered to investigate properly. He saw all the times he'd chosen expedience over justice. "MS. Chen," he said quietly, "take Sammy to the panic room. Now." She moved instantly, helping the limping boy to his feet. Sammy's eyes locked with Ethan's one last time, no longer pleading, but filled with that same strange certainty from the garden. Harrison Ethan straightened his tie, donning his public persona like armor. "Inform our visitors I'll be down shortly. And contact legal. Wake up Davidson if necessary." The next moves formed in his mind like a chess game. He was about to declare war on people who trafficked in children's lives. They would have resources, connections, political protection. One wrong move and he'd lose everything. But looking at the crumpled photo of Maria Martinez, Ethan realized something. He'd spent his life building walls to protect himself from pain, only to become part of the system that inflicted it on others. His phone buzzed a message from his board chairman. "Sunshine Center situation. Handle it. Connection could damage stock price." So they already knew. The web was wider than he'd imagined. Through the window, snow continued falling on his pristine garden where a desperate boy had waited for an angel. Below, predators waited in his lobby, wearing badges and designer suits, expecting him to play by their rules. "Mr. Blake, MS." Chen paused at the panic room door. "Are you sure about this?" He wasn't. This decision would change everything. His carefully constructed world of wealth and influence suddenly felt hollow, built on the same system of convenient lies that had separated Sammy from his sister. But sometimes, he said, remembering Sammy's words, angels have to wear different disguises. He pressed the intercom. "Harrison, tell our visitors I'll need 30 minutes. Cite regulatory compliance protocols. And initiate Protocol 0. Protocol 0, the nuclear option." Within minutes, his most sensitive files would be backed up on secure servers, his assets would begin moving through shell companies, and his emergency escape plans would activate. He'd created it for corporate takeover attempts, never imagining he'd use it to protect a child. The war for Sammy's truth was about to begin, and Ethan Blake, who had spent a lifetime avoiding attachments, was about to risk everything for a boy who believed in angels. The next 24 hours transformed Ethan's penthouse into a command center of organized chaos. While Sammy slept in the panic room under MS Chen's watchful eye, Ethan unleashed the full power of his resources into investigating Sunshine Center. Sir, his head of cybersecurity reported at dawn, looking troubled. The adoption records don't match public databases. In the last year, 43 children were listed as transferred to specialized care facilities, but we can only trace 12 of them. Ethan studied the files on his tablet, each missing face a silent accusation. What about Emma Martinez? Officially transferred to New Hope Children's Center in Connecticut, the analyst hesitated, but New Hope closed 3 years ago. The pieces were falling into place, each revelation darker than the last. Sunshine Center's financial records showed regular donations from shell companies linked to some of the city's most influential names. The same names appeared on guest lists for private adoption events held at exclusive clubs. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Board members demanding explanations. society friends expressing concern about his absence from the lobby meeting. Victoria Wells herself had left 3 voicemails, her tone shifting from concerned professional to veiled threat. "Mr. Blake," she'd said in the last one, "I understand your desire to help but children with challenges like Sammy need specialized care. I'm sure you wouldn't want your reputation tainted by accusations of harboring a troubled runaway. Some of our other donors are quite concerned." The implied threat was clear. He'd seen similar tactics in corporate takeovers, the gentle warning before the killing blow. A deeper search revealed more connections. The judge who had rushed Maria Martinez's conviction was a regular at Sunshine Center Galas. The detective who'd handled her case had a daughter who'd mysteriously received a full scholarship to an exclusive private school the following year. Sir Harrison interrupted his thoughts. "You should see this." Security footage from the night of Maria's arrest played on the screen. Ethan watched himself calling the police, remembered how easily he believed the worst. But there was something else, a figure slipping into his office after hours, planting the necklace behind the dresser. Someone who'd had access, who'd known Maria's schedule. "Freeze frame," Ethan commanded. "Enhance." The grainy image cleared, revealing a face he knew all too well. Victoria Wells, 5 years younger, but unmistakable. She worked as a counselor here, MS. Chen said from the doorway, her face pale. Part-time, for the Employee Assistance Program. She had access to everything: schedules, personnel files, security codes. And a perfect position to identify vulnerable targets, Ethan finished grimly. Single mothers, struggling families. "Mr. Blake," a small voice interrupted. Sammy stood in the doorway, looking impossibly small in borrowed pajamas. "I heard you talking about my mum." Ethan gestured him over, noting how the boy moved carefully, favoring his stronger leg. Another piece clicked. Why would a child with a medical condition be deemed unsuitable for regular adoption, but perfect for specialized care? "Your mother was set up," Ethan said quietly, "by the same people who took Emma. And he swallowed hard, I helped them do it by not asking questions." Sammy studied the frozen image of Wells. She visits the center at night, sometimes with important people. Kids disappear after those visits, especially the ones like me, with problems nobody wants. The implications turned Ethan's stomach. "You've seen these people?" Sammy nodded. "From the air vents. I can't walk well, but I'm good at hiding. That's how I found Emma's file. They didn't think anyone would look behind the old filing cabinet." A sudden commotion from the security desk interrupted them. "Sir, police are back. With a warrant this time." Ethan's mind raced. They'd known this was coming. The system was closing ranks, protecting its own. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed he would play by their rules. "Initiate Protocol 02, he ordered, "and get Davidson on the line. It's time to go offensive." Sir Harrison looked concerned. 02 is designed for hostile takeovers." "That's exactly what this is," Ethan replied, his voice hard. "They thought they could threaten a corporate raider into submission? Let's show them how Wall Street really fights." "What's happening?" Sammy asked, his eyes wide. Ethan knelt down, meeting those trusting eyes. "We're going to find Emma and clear your mother's name. But it's going to get dangerous. These people, they have power and money." "So do you," Sammy said simply. "Mom always said sometimes God sends angels in expensive suits." But looking at the boy's unwavering faith, Ethan made a decision. He'd spent his life building walls to protect himself. Now those same walls would protect this child and bring down the monsters who preyed on the defenseless. The game was about to change, and Ethan Blake was done playing defense. The police entered his penthouse like an invading army, led by Victoria Wells in her designer suit and practiced smile. But Ethan Blake hadn't become a billionaire by being easily intimidated. Detective Morrison Wells purred. "As you can see, Mr. Blake has been harboring a troubled runaway. Perhaps now he'll understand the importance of proper channels. Ethan stood calmly behind his desk, Sammy safely hidden in the panic room below. Actually, Victoria, I believe Detective Morrison might be more interested in these files. He pressed a button, and screens around the room lit up with financial records, particularly the offshore transfers linking Sunshine Center to certain private adoption services. The detective's face remained impassive, but Wells' smile flickered. Mr. Blake, attempting to smear a respected institution. Respected? Ethan's laugh was cold. Like you respected Maria Martinez when you planted that necklace, or how you respect the children who disappear after your special adoption events. Morrison stepped forward, hand near his weapon. Mr. Blake, we have a warrant. And I have footage Ethan cut in smoothly of every private meeting at Sunshine Center for the past 5 years. My security company handles their surveillance, remember? Amazing what people discuss when they think no one's watching. The color drained from Wells' face. You're bluffing. Am I? He pulled up another screen. Should we discuss the judge who fast-tracked Maria's conviction, or perhaps the scholarships offered to certain officials' children? My lawyers are quite interested in those patterns. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Wells hissed, mask finally cracking. These people, they'll destroy you. No, Victoria, you don't know what you're dealing with. Ethan's voice was steel wrapped in silk. I've spent my life building walls to keep people out. Now those walls protect something worth fighting for. His phone buzzed a message from his team. Right on schedule. Detective, he continued, in the next 5 minutes, every major news outlet will receive documentation of Sunshine Center's activities. Financial records, surveillance footage, witness statements. The story's already trending on social media. Morrison's radio crackled with urgent calls. The precinct was being flooded with press inquiries. You'll never prove anything, Wells snarled, but fear had replaced confidence in her eyes. I don't need to. Ethan smiled coldly. I just need to ask enough questions publicly that your donors start worrying about exposure. How loyal do you think they'll stay when their reputations are at risk? As if on cue, Wells' phone erupted with messages. The wolves were already turning on each other. One more thing, Ethan added, pressing another button. The screens filled with a familiar face. Maria Martinez would like to speak with you. Maria's face appeared via video link from the Women's Correctional Facility, her eyes burning with 5 years of injustice. Hello, Victoria. Remember me? The guards just showed me some very interesting evidence about my case. Wells broke. These children, they were unwanted. We gave them purpose. The money helps hundreds of others. Purpose? Maria's voice shook with rage. You sold my daughter. Morrison finally moved, but not toward Ethan. His handcuffs clicked around Wells' wrists as he recited her rights. Detective, Ethan said quietly, I believe the FBI's Human Trafficking Division would be very interested in this case. My team has already contacted them. Wells laughed hysterically. You fool. You think you've won? The people behind this, they'll come for you now. Everything you've built. Let them come. Ethan's voice was ice. I've spent my life playing their game. Now they can play mine. As Wells was led away, still shouting threats, Ethan allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real powers behind Sunshine Center would strike back hard. His phone buzzed again, more urgent messages from his board. The company's stock was already dropping as rumors spread. His carefully built empire might not survive this war. But then he thought of Sammy, hiding below, trusting him to make things right. Of Emma, somewhere out there, waiting to be found. Of Maria, wrongfully imprisoned because he'd once chosen expedience over justice. The panic room door opened, and Sammy emerged, his face tight with worry. Are they gone? Oh, for now, Ethan knelt beside him. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. These people, they won't give up easily. Sammy's hand found his small fingers gripping with surprising strength. Mum says angels don't give up either. Looking into those trusting eyes, Ethan made a silent vow. His walls would no longer keep people out, they would protect those who needed shelter. And heaven help anyone who tried to harm this child. By midnight, the full weight of Ethan's decision became clear. His company's stock had plunged 30% in after-hours trading. 3 board members had resigned. The media was circling like vultures, transforming overnight from sycophants to skeptics. They're calling it Blake's Folly MS, Chen reported, scanning headlines on her tablet. Your major investors are demanding an emergency board meeting. Ethan barely heard her, focused on the surveillance feeds showing unmarked cars circling his building. They'd moved Sammy twice already, using his network of safe houses. Now they were running out of places to hide. His phone rang. Davidson, his head of legal. It's worse than we thought. They're filing criminal charges. Kidnapping, obstruction of justice, interference with a child welfare investigation. They'll freeze your assets by morning. They're trying to isolate us, Ethan muttered, watching another unmarked car join the circle below. Cut off our resources before we can find Emma. Sir Harrison interrupted. There's more. Someone's accessing our secure servers. They're good bypassing our best defenses. But of course they were. People with enough money to buy children would have the resources to destroy anyone who threatened them. They weren't just attacking his wealth, they were going after everything he'd built. His personal phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Back off now. Last warning. Attached was a photo that made his blood freeze. Sammy's mother in her prison cell, sleeping. The implication was clear: nowhere was safe. Mr. Blake, Sammy's voice came from the doorway. He stood there in borrowed pajamas, looking impossibly small against the magnitude of what they faced. I heard them talking. This is all happening because of me. Ethan crossed the room, kneeling to meet the boy's eyes. No, this is happening because people like me looked away too long, because we built our walls so high we couldn't see who was suffering outside them. But your company, everything you worked for, is just money. Ethan surprised himself with how easily he said it. I spent my life building an empire to protect myself from ever feeling helpless again. But what good is all that power if we don't use it to protect others? His secure phone chimed. Facial recognition had found a match from his team's search. Security footage from a private airfield showed a girl matching Emma's description being escorted onto a private jet 3 months ago. They're moving them internationally, Harrison said grimly. High-end buyers, diplomatic protection. The scope of what they were fighting finally hit home. This wasn't just about one corrupt care center. They were up against an international network protected by wealth and political power. Sammy limped to the window, watching the circling cars below. Maybe we should stop. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of me. Ethan joined him, seeing not the luxury cars and glittering skyline, but the shadows where children disappeared while society looked away. When I was your age, he said quietly, I ran away from my group home. Spent 3 days hiding in a mall basement before they found me. Know what I remember most? Not the cold or hunger, but how many people walked by without seeing me. How invisible I felt. Sammy looked up at him, understanding in those old soul eyes. I promised myself I'd never be invisible again, Ethan continued. Built all this to make sure of it. But somewhere along the way I became just like those people who walked past, too focused on my own walls to see who needed help outside them. His phone buzzed again. More threats, more pressure to back down. His empire was crumbling, his reputation in tatters, and dangerous men were closing in. But looking at Sammy, he felt something he hadn't experienced since that scared boy in the mall basement. Purpose. We're not stopping, he said firmly. Whatever it costs, whatever they throw at us, we're finding Emma. And then we're going to tear down every wall that helps monsters hide their crimes. Sammy's hand found his, that simple trust more valuable than all the wealth he might lose. Outside, snow began falling again, covering the city's darkness in deceptive beauty. Somewhere out there, Emma and countless others waited for rescue. The price of helping them might be everything he'd built. But for the first time in his life, Ethan Blake was ready to pay it. The private jet's trail led them to Dubai, where money bought not just silence but immunity. Ethan's team tracked Emma's possible location to a heavily guarded compound on the city's outskirts owned by a charitable foundation with ties to Sunshine Center. Security's top-tier Harrison reported, reviewing surveillance footage. Private military contractors, diplomatic plates on the vehicles. They're not even pretending anymore. Ethan studied the compound's blueprints obtained through channels he'd rather not discuss. The same channels had revealed other children inside all special cases from various care centers around the world. Local authorities won't help, Davidson warned via encrypted call. The Foundation's board includes 3 royal family members, and our Windows closing your assets freeze takes effect in 48 hours. Sammy sat quietly in the hotel suite's corner, watching Arabic children's shows on TV while the adults planned. But Ethan had noticed how he absorbed everything, those watchful eyes missing nothing. "She's scared of the dark," Sammy said suddenly, not looking away from the TV. "Emma. She always needed a nightlight. Do you think they let her have one?" The simple question cut through all their tactical discussions, reminding them what was really at stake. "We'll find out soon," Ethan promised, his resolve hardening. He turned to his team. "What about the other option?" Harrison hesitated. "Contact confirmed, but dealing with him. It's risky. More risky than what we're already doing." The contact was Qadir al-Rahman, a former intelligence operative turned private security consultant. He had a reputation for getting things done without asking questions for a price. The meeting was set for midnight at a small shisha cafe in the old city. Ethan went alone, against his team's advice, leaving Sammy under heavy protection. Qadir was younger than expected, with kind eyes that contradicted his dangerous reputation. "Your situation interests me, Mr. Blake. Not many billionaires risk everything for one child." "It's not just one child anymore," Ethan replied, sliding over a file. "This is bigger than Emma Martinez." Qadir reviewed the documents, his expression darkening. "These names, you understand what you're involving yourself in?" "I understand that someone needs to stop them." "Why you?" Qadir asked sharply. "You had wealth, power, respect. Why risk it all?" Ethan thought of Sammy watching children's shows, worrying about his sister's fear of the dark, while they discussed tactical approaches. "Because I spent my life building walls to keep the world out," he said quietly, never realizing I was helping monsters hide behind them. Qadir studied him for a long moment. "The compound has an underground level," he finally said. "Not on any official plans. That's where they keep the children before transport." The implication made Ethan's stomach turn. "Can you get us in?" "No," Qadir smiled slightly. "But I can create a distraction. The rest will be up to you." The plan came together over the next 24 hours. Qadir's connections would arrange a security incident at another high-profile location, drawing away most of the compound's guards. A separate team would disable the power grid for that sector. In the chaos, Ethan's people would move. But as they finalized details, Sammy developed a fever. The stress, travel, and his ongoing medical issues had taken their toll. "We should postpone MS," Chen urged, watching the boy toss in restless sleep. "He needs proper medical care." "No," Sammy mumbled, his eyes glassy but determined. "Emma's waiting. She's scared of the dark, remember." Ethan sat by his bed that night, watching the boy fight through fevered dreams. He thought of all the children in that compound, separated from families, treated like commodities by the wealthy and powerful. How many others had sisters worried about their fear of the dark? His phone buzzed another warning from the board. His company's stock had fallen another 20%. Longtime allies were distancing themselves. The media was running stories suggesting mental instability, painting him as a delusional vigilante. None of it mattered anymore. "Your fever's getting worse," he told Sammy gently. "We need to get you to a hospital." Not without Emma, Sammy insisted, his small hand gripping Ethan's with surprising strength. "Promise me. Don't leave her in the dark." Looking into those trust-filled eyes, Ethan made his decision. "Harrison," he called, "move up the timeline. We go tonight." Sir Harrison protested. "The team's not ready." "Emma's not ready either," Ethan cut him off. "None of those children are ready for what happens to them. No more delays." As his team scrambled to adjust plans, Ethan kept his vigil by Sammy's bedside. The boy had finally drifted into uneasy sleep, murmuring his sister's name. Outside the hotel window, Dubai's skyline glittered with artificial stars, wealth and power displayed in steel and glass. Somewhere in that glittering forest of wealth, a little girl was afraid of the dark, waiting for rescue that might never come. Ethan Blake had spent his life building walls to protect himself from the world's darkness. Now those walls were crumbling, and he was about to step into darkness of his own choosing. But for the first time since that scared boy in the mall basement, he felt truly worthy of the fortune he'd built. While Ethan's team prepared for the Dubai operation, another war raged in New York's legal arena. Davidson had assembled a team of top lawyers, fighting on multiple fronts as their opponents tried to bury them in litigation. "They've frozen your personal accounts," Davidson reported via Secure Line. "The board's calling an emergency meeting to vote on your removal. And the DA's office just filed additional charges: money laundering, conspiracy, racketeering. They're throwing everything at us." Maria Martinez's case had become the centerpiece of their legal strategy. Her appeal hearing was expedited thanks to the new evidence, but their opponents had anticipated this move. "The original judge refuses to recuse himself," Davidson continued, "and key evidence is mysteriously disappearing from police storage. They're systematically dismantling our case." The DA's office had assigned prosecutor James Werner to handle the charges against Ethan. Werner had a reputation for being ruthless, with a perfect conviction record against white-collar defendants. "Mr. Blake," Werner said during their first confrontation in court, his smile sharp as a blade, "let's be clear about what's happening here. You're not a hero. You're a disturbed individual using a vulnerable child to act out some savior fantasy." But Werner hadn't counted on Maria Martinez. Even in Prison Orange, she carried herself with dignity that commanded attention. For 5 years, she testified, her voice steady. "I cleaned houses for people who had everything. I watched them kiss their children goodnight, while mine waited in daycare. I never complained, never envied. I just worked harder, believing in the American dream." The courtroom fell silent as she continued. "Then they took everything: my freedom, my children, my hope. Why? Because people like Mr. Werner believe poverty makes us guilty by default." Werner tried to object, but Maria's words had struck a chord. Social media exploded with "Justice for Maria" hashtags. Other former Sunshine Center families began coming forward with similar stories. The tide of public opinion began to shift. Local news stations ran exposés on the corruption within the child welfare system. Protests formed outside Sunshine Center, which had been temporarily closed pending investigation. But their opponents fought back dirty. Character assassination pieces appeared in major newspapers, suggesting Maria had been involved in drug trafficking. Social services suddenly discovered concerns about her parenting from years ago. "They're trying to bury the truth in paperwork," Davidson sighed. "Every time we close one angle, they open 3 more." Then came the masterstroke. Werner offered Maria a deal: immediate release, charges expunged, generous compensation. if she publicly denounced Ethan and claimed he had manipulated her story for his own agenda. Maria's response made headlines: "My children are not for sale. Not to traffickers, not to prosecutors, not to anyone." The legal battles were taking their toll. Ethan's resources were draining rapidly. Several key witnesses had been intimidated into silence. Even Davidson's firm was facing pressure from other clients to drop the case. But unexpected allies emerged. A junior prosecutor in Werner's office anonymously leaked documents showing pattern of case fixing. A retired judge came forward with records of suspicious adoption fast-tracking. Former Sunshine Center employees began telling their stories, but they're getting desperate, Davidson observed as more evidence surfaced, making mistakes. The biggest break came from an unlikely source, Victoria Wells herself. Facing serious charges and abandoned by her powerful friends, she decided to save herself. "They're calling you a conspiracy theorist," she told Ethan during a supervised meeting. "But we both know the truth is worse than any conspiracy. I'll tell you everything: names, dates, bank accounts. But I want protection." Her testimony opened floodgates. The carefully constructed legal walls protecting the trafficking network began to crack. Werner made one last attempt to contain the damage. In a private meeting with Ethan, he laid out the stakes. "Think carefully," he warned. "These people, they don't just ruin careers. Accidents happen. Witnesses disappear. Is this really worth dying for?" Ethan thought of Sammy's fever-bright eyes, of Emma somewhere in the Dubai darkness, of Maria's unwavering dignity. "That's the difference between us," he replied. "You see this as a case to win. I see children who need someone to fight for them, whatever the cost." As Werner left, Ethan received word from Dubai the operation window was opening. Everything they'd fought for in court had led to this moment. "Davidson," he said quietly, "if something happens to me, make sure the evidence gets out, all of it." "It won't come to that," Davidson insisted. "We're winning." But they both knew legal victories meant little if they couldn't get those children out of that compound. All their court battles had really been buying one thing: time. Now that time was running out. As the Dubai operation approached, the changes in both Ethan and Sammy became increasingly evident. The ruthless corporate raider who once measured life in profit margins now spent nights reading bedtime stories to a fevered child. The scared boy who'd hidden in air vents had found his voice, his strength. "Tell me again about the company you'll build," Sammy asked during one of his more lucid moments, his fever finally breaking. "After all this is over." Ethan smiled, adjusting the cool cloth on the boy's forehead. "A different kind of security firm, one that protects people, not just data. We'll help families stay together, make sure no other children disappear into the system. All like angels in business suits." Something like that. The transformation wasn't lost on his team. MS Chen, who'd worked with Ethan for a decade, observed the changes with quiet approval. "I used to schedule your entire life in 15-minute blocks," she remarked one evening. "Now you spend hours just sitting with him, talking about everything and nothing." It wasn't just time. Ethan's entire worldview had shifted. The man who once saw emotions as weaknesses now understood they could be a source of strength. His walls, built so carefully over years, were coming down brick by brick. "You're different too," he told Sammy, watching the boy methodically organize intelligence reports with his toy soldiers. Most kids would be terrified. Sammy arranged another soldier carefully. "I was, still am sometimes. But Mom always said being brave isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right anyway." The boy had developed an uncanny ability to read people and situations, his previous survival skills evolving into genuine emotional intelligence. He could tell when team members were getting overwhelmed, offering simple words or gestures that somehow always helped. He makes us remember why we're fighting. Harrison admitted after Sammy had helped him through a particularly stressful strategy session with a simple hug and shared cookie. Even Kadir, the hardened operative, wasn't immune. During a secure video call, Sammy had asked about his family. "My daughter would be about your age," Kadir had said softly, his professional mask slipping. "If she had lived." The connection forged in that moment proved stronger than any contract. But growth came with pain. Ethan struggled with guilt over his past indifference, the times he'd looked away from injustice because it was convenient. Sammy battled nightmares about his sister, his faith in angels sometimes wavering in the dark hours. "What if we're too late?" he whispered one night, after a particularly bad dream. "What if she doesn't remember me?" Ethan held him through the tears, remembering his own childhood fears of abandonment. Love doesn't forget, kid. It's the one thing they can't take away. The pressure brought other changes. Ethan learned to trust, genuinely delegating rather than controlling. His team, inspired by their leader's transformation, went above and beyond, many working without pay after their accounts were frozen. "We used to follow you because you paid well," Harrison told him. "Now we follow because you've shown us what really matters." Sammy, too, was learning to accept help instead of always hiding and observing. His natural resilience blossomed into real confidence, tempered by genuine empathy. One evening, he found Ethan staring at his company's plummeting stock prices. "I'm sorry about your money," Sammy said, limping over. "It's my fault." Ethan pulled him close. "No, it's my choice. And you know what? For the first time in my life, I'm rich in things that actually matter." The boy studied him with those old soul eyes. "You were scared too, weren't you, before? That's why you built all those walls." "Yeah," Ethan admitted. "I thought if I had enough money, enough power, I'd never feel helpless again. But now I know real strength isn't about walls. It's about what we're willing to fight for." As the final preparations for Dubai proceeded, both man and boy had evolved far beyond their original roles. Ethan was no longer just a wealthy benefactor, nor Sammy just a child needing rescue. They'd become something more, teachers to each other, partners in an impossible mission, family forged in adversity. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Ethan said on the eve of the operation, "you've already changed me for the better." Sammy hugged him fiercely. "Angels don't give up, remember." Looking down at this remarkable child who'd crashed through his defenses and rebuilt his heart, Ethan finally understood what real wealth meant. Everything went wrong in Dubai at exactly 2:17 a.m. The power outage meant to cover their approach never happened. The security force that should have been drawn away by Kadir's distraction remained firmly in place. And worst of all, their encrypted communications suddenly went dark. "They knew we were coming," Harrison hissed through their backup channel. Someone talked. Ethan, positioned with Team Alpha near the compound's east wall, watched their carefully planned operation unravel. The compound's floodlights blazed defiantly, and he could see enhanced security patrols moving with practiced precision. Then his phone buzzed a video call from an unknown number. The image that appeared made his blood freeze. "I believe we should talk," Mr. Blake said. Werner, the prosecutor from New York. Behind him, two men held a struggling Sammy. Despite the boy's obvious fear, his eyes blazed with defiance. "He was supposed to be secured," Ethan growled at Harrison. "The hotel's entire security system went down," Harrison replied grimly. "Professional job. They must have had people in place for days." Werner's smile was predatory. "Your operation ends now, Mr. Blake. Pull your teams back," or he nodded to one of the men, who roughly jerked Sammy's arm. "Don't," Sammy shouted through the screen. "Emma's in there. I can feel it. Don't let them." A hand clamped over his mouth. "You have 5 minutes to comply," Werner said. or we'll show you what happens to children who know too much." The video cut off. Ethan's mind raced through scenarios, each worse than the last. His team awaited orders, their mission now impossibly complicated. Then another call came through Kadir. "They have my daughter too," the operative said without preamble. "The one I told you was dead. She's alive in that compound. That's why I helped you. But now they have both our children, my friend." The pieces clicked into place. The perfect intel, the convenient access, the last-minute changes they'd been played from the start. 3 minutes, Mr. Blake Werner texted. Tick-tock. Inside the compound, floodlights suddenly caught movement, a line of children being hurriedly moved toward waiting vehicles. Through high-powered binoculars, Ethan spotted a small figure among them. "Emma," he breathed. She looked exactly like her photo, but thinner, her movements mechanical. Behind her, other children followed with the same haunting compliance. 2 minutes. Harrison's voice crackled through comms. "Sir, if we pull back now, they'll disappear," Ethan finished. "All of them. And we'll never get another chance." His phone buzzed again. Sammy had managed to send a text, "Angels don't give up." In that moment, Ethan Blake made the hardest decision of his life. All teams execute Operation Fallen Angel. Now. Sir Harrison's shock was evident. That's the suicide protocol. We'd be going in blind against superior forces. "They won't expect it," Ethan replied, "already moving. Because no sane person would try it, and because they think they control all the pieces." 1 minute, Mr. Blake Werner texted. Ethan's reply was simple: "Look up." Above the compound, previously hidden drones suddenly activated, their lights creating a dazzling display. In the confusion, smoke canisters launched from multiple directions. And through the chaos, teams of highly trained operatives, a contingency force Ethan had positioned without telling anyone, began their assault. "You're not the only one who can plan contingencies," he texted Werner. "Now let's talk about your surrender." But even as his backup plan unfolded, Ethan knew the real race was just beginning. Somewhere in the city, Sammy faced unknown dangers. Within the compound, Emma and countless others were moments from disappearing forever. And his own position was now fatally exposed. Harrison, split the teams. Alpha and Bravo, secure the compound. Charlie team, track Werner's location. I'm going after Sammy. Alone? Sir, that's not up for discussion. Ethan was already moving, driven by a purpose stronger than fear. Get those kids to safety, whatever it takes. His phone buzzed one final time. "Werner again, you just signed their death warrants." But in the background of Werner's threat, Ethan had noticed something in the video feed, a detail only someone who'd spent countless hours with Sammy would recognize. The boy had been blinking rapidly, Morse code, something they'd practiced during long nights in the safe house. 3 letters, repeated GPSP. Sammy had managed to keep his emergency tracker active. "Angels don't give up," Ethan muttered, following the signal into Dubai's neon-lit darkness. "And neither do we." Behind him, the compound erupted into organized chaos. Ahead, somewhere in the maze of luxury hotels and shadowy alleys, a brave boy waited for rescue, and time was running out for all of them. The GPS signal led Ethan to Al Barsha, an upscale district where luxury villas hid behind high walls and private security. Werner had chosen his safe house, well, a modernist mansion with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes. Target confirmed. Harrison's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Thermal imaging shows 8 adults, 1 child. They're in the basement level. But sir, there's something else. The energy signature." "Explosives," Ethan finished grimly. "They've rigged the building." Werner's face appeared on his phone again. "I wondered how long it would take you to find us. Impressive security system you put on the boy." But now you have a choice to make. The camera panned to show Sammy tied to a chair. Despite bruises on his face, the boy's eyes still held that unwavering faith. "Your teams are making quite a mess at the compound," Werner continued. "Very expensive mess. My employers are displeased. So here's the deal: you call them off, surrender yourself, and the boy lives. Otherwise..." He held up a detonator. "Well, real estate is all about location and timing, isn't it?" Ethan's mind raced. The mansion's security was state-of-the-art, but like all systems, it had a weakness. In this case, arrogance. "You know what your mistake was?" he asked Werner, already sending coded signals to his backup team. "You thought this was about money, about power, but it was always about something else." "Save the speeches," Werner snapped. "You have 3 minutes?" "It was about faith," Ethan continued, watching his phone's signal strength indicator. "The faith of a child who still believed in angels. The faith of a mother who never gave up. The faith that doing the right thing matters more than winning." 2 minutes. "And your philosophy degree isn't impressive." But Ethan could see Sammy in the background, recognizing the words for what they were: a signal. The boy began rocking his chair, seemingly in fear, but each movement had purpose. "You built your whole operation on the assumption that everyone has a price," Ethan pressed. "That's why you never saw us coming, because some things can't be bought." 1 minute, Mr. Blake. Last chance." Sammy's chair toppled, creating just enough chaos for what happened next. The mansion's lights went out not from a power cut, but from a targeted electromagnetic pulse that fried every circuit in the building. In the sudden darkness, chaos erupted. Ethan's team, already in position, breached from multiple points. They moved with surgical precision, their night vision gear giving them a crucial advantage. Werner's men, caught between protecting their boss and securing their prisoner, hesitated fatally. But Werner himself moved with unexpected speed, grabbing Sammy as a shield. "Stay back," he shouted, pressing a gun to the boy's head. "I'll kill him." "No," Ethan's voice came from the darkness. "You won't." "Why is that?" "Because you're still thinking like a lawyer, calculating odds, weighing outcomes. But I'm thinking like a father." The word hung in the air: father. Something neither of them had planned on becoming, yet here they were. Werner's laugh was harsh. "You're not his father. You're just another rich man playing savior." "You're right," Ethan agreed, his voice moving closer. "I'm not his father. I'm his angel." The shot, when it came, was anticlimactic. A single round from a sniper positioned long before Werner had even arrived. Clean, precise, final. Werner fell, his last expression one of genuine surprise. He'd never considered that someone would value a child's life above the rules of engagement. Ethan reached Sammy in 3 strides, cutting his bonds with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" "Did they?" The boy launched himself into Ethan's arms. "I knew you'd come. I did the GPS thing just like we practiced." "You were so brave," Ethan whispered, holding him tight. "But we're not done yet, Emma." His safe Harrison's voice crackled through comms. "Compound secured. All children accounted for, including Kadir's daughter." Sammy's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Emma's really okay?" "See for yourself." A video feed appeared on Ethan's phone: Emma, being wrapped in blankets by medical staff, asking repeatedly for her brother. "Can we go now?" Sammy asked, his voice small. "I want to see my sister." Ethan lifted him carefully, mindful of his injuries. "Yes, it's time to bring your family back together." As they emerged from the mansion, dawn was breaking over Dubai. Emergency vehicles approached in the distance, their lights competing with the rising sun. "You called me father," Sammy said suddenly. "Did you mean it?" Ethan looked down at this remarkable child who'd crashed through all his defenses. "If you'll have me." "You, Emma, your mum. There's plenty of room in that big empty penthouse." Sammy's smile was brighter than the rising sun. Angels really do wear expensive suits sometimes. Dawn found them racing against time at the compound, where the situation had evolved into a complex humanitarian operation. 27 children from 12 countries had been rescued, each requiring immediate medical attention and careful handling. They were drugging them, the medical team reported, examining blood samples, sedatives, compliance medications. Some have been here for months. Emma was among the most affected. When Ethan and Sammy finally reached her, she sat wrapped in a shock blanket, staring vacantly at nothing. The light that had shone so brightly in her photos was dimmed, replaced by a haunting emptiness. Sammy limped forward, his own injuries forgotten. "It's me, your big brother." She didn't respond at first, her conditioning too deep. The traffickers had used sophisticated psychological techniques to break down their victims' identities. She needs time, the psychiatrist warned. The trauma. But Sammy wasn't listening. He pulled something from his pocket, the pink hair ribbon he'd kept all these months. "Remember this," he said softly, holding it out. "Mom got it for your first day of school. You said it made you feel like a princess." Emma's fingers twitched, her eyes focusing slightly on the faded ribbon. "You were scared that day," Sammy continued, his voice gentle. "But you know what you told me? It's okay to be scared when you have family, remember." A tear rolled down Emma's cheek. "I got scared too while you were gone, but I knew we'd find you, because Mom always says, angels come when you need them most," Emma whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. The siblings collided in a fierce hug, their sobs echoing across the compound. Medical staff wiped away tears. Hardened security personnel suddenly found urgent tasks elsewhere. But they weren't done. Other children needed help, each with their own tragic story. Kadir's reunion with his daughter was particularly poignant. "They told me she died in the accident," he explained, cradling the girl he'd thought lost forever. "Used her to control me, to make me help them. But now we make it right," Ethan finished. The logistics were staggering. Each child needed medical care, psychological support, and secure transportation. Many had been listed as deceased in their home countries, their identities essentially erased. "Multiple governments are involved," Harrison reported. "Diplomatic nightmares brewing. Some powerful people want this quietly buried." "Not happening," Ethan replied, watching Sammy help coax another traumatized child into accepting medical attention. No more secrets, no more shadows. But threats were mounting. Local authorities, influenced by corrupt officials, were demanding custody of the children. Private security contractors, loyal to the trafficking network, were gathering nearby. "We have maybe 2 hours," Harrison estimated. Then this gets ugly. Ethan made rapid decisions. His private jets, still unfrozen, were redirected for emergency evacuation. Diplomatic contacts were called in, markers collected. Whatever legitimate influence remained was leveraged. "Get me Maria on video call," he ordered. "These kids need to see proof that rescue is real." Maria's face on the big screen had an immediate impact. She spoke to the children in multiple languages, her own experience of imprisonment giving weight to her words of hope. "You are not forgotten," she told them. "You are not alone. And you are going home." Emma finally spoke more than whispers, asking for her mother. Other children began showing signs of emerging from their trauma-induced shells. But time was running out. Local police vehicles were gathering at the compound's gates, their intentions unclear. Helicopters circled overhead. "First transport ready," Harrison announced, "but we're light on security for the convoy." That's when their final surprise arrived. Local mothers, hearing about the rescue through underground networks, formed a human chain around the compound. Their message was clear: no one would hurt these children again. "My son disappeared 3 years ago," one woman told reporters who'd finally caught wind of the story. "Maybe he's in another compound somewhere. Maybe someone will save him too." The show of solidarity turned the tide. Local authorities, faced with a growing media presence and international attention, backed down. The children were evacuated in stages, each transport carefully monitored. Emma wouldn't leave without Sammy, and Sammy wouldn't leave without Ethan. They made the journey together, the girl clutching her brother's hand while he held on to Ethan. "Are we really going home?" Emma asked as their plane took off. "All of us." Ethan looked at these two remarkable children, thinking of the penthouse that had never felt like a home until now. "Yes," he said firmly, "all of us, together." Like a real family, her voice was small, afraid to hope. "Better," Sammy told her, his faith unshakable. "Like angels." As they climbed through Dubai's dawn sky, Ethan Blake, who had spent his life building walls, finally understood. Sometimes the strongest walls aren't the ones that keep people out, but the ones that bring them together. Dear wonderful viewers, every subscription is like a warm hug of support for our storytelling journey. If this tale of love, hope, and redemption touched your heart, please consider joining our family. Your support helps us create more meaningful stories that inspire change. Thank you. Back in New York, the true cost of their victory began to emerge. The media storm was unprecedented, as evidence of high-level involvement in child trafficking sent shockwaves through society's elite circles. Secure Flow stock has dropped 78% MS. Chen reported grimly, "The board has voted to remove you. Major clients are terminating contracts. The company, it's over." Ethan watched from his penthouse as news helicopters circled, reporters hungry for a glimpse of the billionaire who'd sacrificed everything. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, former friends distancing themselves, business partners cutting ties, lawyers warning of impending lawsuits. "They're calling it the biggest corporate suicide in history," Harrison added, scanning headlines. "Your net worth has dropped from $4.2 billion to, well, after legal fees and frozen assets, we're not sure there's anything left." The evidence they'd gathered in Dubai was being systematically discredited. Key witnesses were recanting under pressure, digital records mysteriously corrupted. The powerful were closing ranks, determined to bury the truth. "Your reputation, MS." Chen hesitated. "They're painting you as mentally unstable. A wealthy man having a psychotic break, fabricating conspiracy theories." Social media was flooded with carefully crafted character assassination. Old employees emerged with stories of erratic behavior. Medical experts speculated about psychological disorders. Every piece of his life was being rewritten to fit their narrative. But the deepest cuts were personal. His mother's grave had been vandalized. His father's old war medals, the only things he had left of him, stolen from his safe deposit box. They were sending a message nothing was sacred. "They're going after everyone," Harrison warned. MS Chen's brother suddenly lost his teaching job. "My wife's art gallery lost its lease. They're isolating us, cutting off support." Even his philanthropic work was being weaponized against him. Children's charities he'd supported for years publicly distanced themselves. Scholarship programs he'd funded were suspended. They were erasing every good thing he'd ever done. The penthouse, once his fortress, felt increasingly vulnerable. Security breaches became more frequent. Strange accidents plagued his staff. The message was clear: no one around him was safe. "We should consider witness protection," Harrison suggested. "Start over somewhere new." But Ethan knew there was no starting over. The same system that had failed those children would never protect him. His wealth, once a shield, had become a target painted on his back. The worst moment came when he found Sammy crying in the garden, clutching a tablet. "They're saying you're crazy," the boy sobbed. that none of it was real, that Emma and the others were never in danger, that you kidnapped me for publicity. Ethan held him close, feeling the tremors of fear and uncertainty. Do you believe them? No, but what if others do? What if they take us away from you? It was a valid fear. Child Services was already making noise about concerns for the children's welfare, his fitness as a guardian was being questioned in the press. The final blow came in the form of a letter from his boarding school. His academic records had been revised, suggesting a history of mental health issues. They were literally rewriting his past. They're thorough, he admitted to Maria during a secure call. Taking everything I built, everything I am. Not everything, she corrected firmly. They can't take what matters most. She was right, but the losses were still staggering. His life's work, his reputation, his security, all crumbling like sand castles before a rising tide. That night, unable to sleep, he found Sammy and Emma in the garden. They had built a fort from blankets, like children anywhere might do, but they had positioned it to watch the door, and Emma still startled at sudden noises. "We're safe here, right?" Emma asked, her voice small. "They won't find us." Ethan looked at these children, who had survived horrors yet still found the courage to hope. His fortune was gone, his reputation destroyed, his future uncertain. But watching them find comfort in simple things, a blanket fort, a shared story, the safety of being together, he understood what real wealth meant. "We're safe," he promised, knowing it might be a lie. "And we have something they can never take." "What's that?" Sammy asked. "The truth. And each other." As helicopter searchlights swept across his crumbling empire, Ethan Blake held these children close and accepted that sometimes the greatest losses clear the way for the most precious gains. The sacrifices mounted like shadows at dusk, each one testing the limits of their resolve. The legal system, once merely indifferent, had become actively hostile. Every judge who showed sympathy was suddenly replaced. Every favorable ruling mysteriously overturned. Maria's appeal, despite overwhelming evidence of her innocence, stalled in bureaucratic limbo. "They're threatening my lawyer's family," she revealed during their last secure call. He withdrew from the case this morning. The children rescued from Dubai faced their own battles. Several disappeared back into the system before they could testify. Others were suddenly diagnosed with mental conditions that conveniently discredited their statements. The truth was being buried in an avalanche of legal paperwork and psychiatric evaluations. Kadir paid the highest price. After reuniting his daughter with her mother in Canada, he vanished. His last message was cryptic: "Some sacrifices are worth making. Keep them safe." Intelligence channels reported he'd traded his life for his family's permanent protection. MS. Jen lost her home to a mysterious fire. Harrison's wife filed for divorce under pressure. One by one, everyone who stood with Ethan was being forced to choose between loyalty and survival. The children felt it most keenly. Emma's nightmares returned with crushing intensity. She would wake screaming, convinced they were coming to take her back. Sammy stopped sleeping altogether, maintaining a silent vigil by his sister's bed. "I won't let them separate us again," he promised, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. "Never again." The worst sacrifice came when they had to leave the penthouse. After another security breach, this time a gas leak that could have killed them all, staying became too dangerous. "We have to go," Ethan decided, watching Emma touch the garden flowers one last time. "But we'll find another home." "It's not about the place," Sammy said quietly, his old soul wisdom showing through. "Home is where we're together." They moved constantly after that, never staying anywhere more than a few days. Luxury hotels became budget motels, became safe houses. Each move meant leaving something else behind: clothes, toys, pieces of their former lives. Emma's precious books, Sammy's collection of robot parts, Ethan's last remaining pieces of art, all abandoned in their wake. material sacrifices that hurt less than the emotional ones. The children couldn't go to school, couldn't make friends, couldn't have anything resembling a normal life. Their world shrank to the size of whatever room they were hiding in, their only constants each other. "I'm sorry," Ethan told them one night, after another hasty relocation. "You deserve better than this." "We have better," Emma replied, surprising them all. "We have family." But the sacrifices continued. Their protective circle grew smaller as more allies were forced to step away. Even Davidson, his most loyal lawyer, finally broke under the pressure. "They're going after my daughter's medical care," he admitted, voice breaking. "I can't. I have to think of her." Ethan understood. Everyone had their breaking point, their line in the sand. He'd already crossed his the moment he'd chosen these children over everything else. The final sacrifice came disguised as an offer. A midnight meeting, an unnamed government official, a deal that felt like a devil's bargain. "Walk away," the man said simply. "Sign these papers saying it was all a misunderstanding. We'll restore your assets, rebuild your reputation, make everything go away. The children will be placed with appropriate families. Everyone wins." The old Ethan, the man who'd built walls to protect himself, might have considered it. A chance to reclaim everything he'd lost, to return to his safe, ordered world. But looking at Sammy and Emma, asleep in the safe house's small bedroom, he knew there was no choice to make. Some sacrifices were really investments in something greater than wealth or power. "No deal," he told the official. "Some things aren't for sale." "Then you'll lose everything," the man warned. "And for what? Children who aren't even yours." Ethan smiled, thinking of angels in expensive suits and faith that never wavered. "That's where you're wrong," he replied. "I'm not losing everything. I'm finally finding what matters." Later, watching the children sleep, he reflected on all they'd sacrificed: comfort, security, normalcy. But in their faces, even troubled by dreams, he saw something his billions had never bought: peace. The dark moment came on a rainy Tuesday in December, exactly 1 year after Sammy had first appeared in Ethan's garden. They'd been tracked to their latest safe house, a modest apartment in Queens. This time their pursuers came with official warrants and child services badges. By order of the court, the lead agent announced, the minors Emma and Samuel Martinez are to be placed in protective custody, pending investigation of their current guardian's fitness. Emma screamed when they tried to take her, the sound piercing Ethan's heart like a physical wound. Sammy fought with everything he had, his bad leg forgotten in desperation. "You can't separate us," he shouted. "We promised. Angels don't break promises." But the system, cold and implacable, cared nothing for promises or angels. The children were dragged away while Ethan was held back, helpless against the weight of legal authority. "This is for their own good," the social worker said, not meeting his eyes. "They need stability, normalcy, not a life on the run with a man facing criminal charges." Their last sight of each other was devastating. Emma reaching back, tears streaming down her face, Sammy struggling against the workers, his faith finally breaking. "You said you'd protect us," his cry echoed in the empty apartment. "You promised." The silence afterward was deafening. Ethan stood in the rain, watching the cars disappear, feeling his world collapse all over again. Ms. Chen found him there hours later, still staring at the spot where they'd vanished. "They're splitting them up," she reported, her voice hollow. "Different facilities, different states, making sure they can't find each other again." The darkness that followed was absolute. Reports filtered in, each worse than the last. Emma had stopped speaking again. Sammy had attempted to escape 3 times. Their new facilities had enhanced security measures, a euphemism for what amounted to prison. Maria, still fighting her own legal battles, was denied all contact. Her calls from prison were filled with helpless tears. "My babies," she sobbed. "They're doing to them what they did to me, making us disappear in plain sight." Ethan's own spiral was profound. The man who had once commanded boardrooms now sat in empty rooms, haunted by memories of bedtime stories and blanket forts. His walls, once built to keep others out, now trapped him in his own hell. "We have to do something," Harrison urged. "There must be a way." But every legal avenue was blocked. Every attempt at contact was rebuffed. The system that had failed these children was now using its full power to protect them from the only people who had truly tried to help. The media painted it as justice, the dangerous influence removed, order restored. Editorial pages praised the court's wisdom in separating impressionable children from a delusional vigilante. Nights were the worst. Ethan would find himself in his garden, staring at the spot where Sammy had waited for his angel. The boy's faith, once so inspiring, now felt like another broken promise. The darkness reached its peak when a package arrived: Emma's pink hair ribbon and Sammy's favorite book, returned as unauthorized personal items by their respective facilities. A final twist of the knife, reminding him of everything he'd failed to protect. That night, alone in his emptied penthouse, Ethan Blake, the man who had once moved markets with a word, finally broke. The walls he'd spent a lifetime building, then learning to tear down, now felt like a tomb. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." For the first time since his childhood in foster care, he felt truly helpless. His wealth was gone, his power stripped away, his heart shattered by the cries of children he'd promised to protect. The system had won. The truth was buried. The monsters remained safely hidden behind their respectable facades. And somewhere, in separate facilities designed to break spirits and erase identities, two children who had dared to believe in angels were learning the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes faith isn't enough. Or so it seemed on that darkest night, when even angels seemed to have abandoned hope. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A janitor at one of Ethan's old office buildings found a hidden server while cleaning a backup system even Ethan had forgotten about. On it, decades of automated recordings, including security footage from the day Maria's necklace disappeared. "You need to see this," Harrison said, his voice urgent. The footage showed more than just Wells planting the necklace. It revealed a pattern of late-night meetings in Ethan's office, spanning years before the incident. "They were using my company," Ethan realized, watching shadowy figures discuss special adoptions in his own boardroom, right under my nose. All those international contracts. The server contained more. Financial records showed Secure Flow's encryption services had been secretly used to hide trafficking communications. Board members he'd trusted had been complicit, using his legitimate business as cover for their darker operations. "That's why they came after you so hard," Harrison explained. "You weren't just threatening their current operations, you were sitting on evidence of their entire history." But the most devastating revelation came from an encrypted email chain. The night before Sammy appeared in his garden wasn't random. They had orchestrated everything: the boy's escape, the timing, even making sure Ethan would be in his study at that exact moment. "They wanted you to find him," Ms. Chen whispered. "To make you the perfect target. A wealthy man with a hidden past making wild accusations about child trafficking. Who would believe you once they destroyed your credibility?" The conspiracy was breathtaking in its scope. Judges, politicians, business leaders, all connected through a web of shell companies and private foundations. The same foundations now controlling the facilities where Emma and Sammy were held. "Look at this," Harrison pointed to a document. The psychiatric facility evaluating Emma, owned by a shell company connected to Werner's law firm, and Sammy's new special care center, funded by your own former board members. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. They hadn't separated the children to protect them, they were being used as insurance, ensuring Ethan couldn't use his newfound evidence without risking their safety. More connections emerged. The social worker who'd taken the children was on Werner's payroll. The judge who'd ordered their removal had received mysterious payments through offshore accounts. "It goes deeper," Ms. Chen reported, digging through files. "Your parents' deaths, It wasn't an accident. They were investigating similar disappearances through their charity work. The same pattern: vulnerable children, corrupt officials, powerful buyers. Ethan sat heavily, the weight of this truth crushing him. His entire life had been shaped by these shadows, and he'd never seen them. His walls hadn't just blinded him, they'd made him complicit through his ignorance. Sir Harrison interrupted his dark thoughts. There's something else. A protocol buried in the service code. Your father created it, called it Guardian Angel. The program was elegant in its simplicity. For decades, it had been quietly collecting data, connecting dots, building a case that could tear down the entire network. And now, finally, it had enough. He knew. Ethan breathed. He knew they'd come after him, so he created this digital deadman switch, waiting for someone to find it. The evidence was overwhelming. Names, dates, transactions, everything needed to expose decades of corruption. But using it would mean declaring open war on some of the most powerful people in the world. If we do this, Harrison warned, there's no going back. They'll come at us with everything they have. Ethan looked at the pink hair ribbon and worn book on his desk, small reminders of two children who had dared to believe in angels. Children now trapped in the same system that had killed his parents. My father died protecting children like Sammy and Emma, he said quietly. I spent years hiding behind walls, thinking I was protecting myself. But he showed us the real meaning of protection. He stood, determination replacing despair. Activate Guardian Angel, all of it. Let's show these monsters what happens when angels decide to fight back. Sir MS? Chen smiled for the first time in weeks. Should I call Davidson? We'll need legal teams ready. Call everyone, Ethan ordered. Every contact, every ally we have left. Tell them it's time to tear down some walls. The server hummed, decades of hidden truth preparing to shake the foundations of power. And somewhere in that digital maze, a father's last gift to his son began to unfold, a chance to finish what he had died trying to expose. Maria Martinez's voice shook as she testified before the hastily convened federal grand jury, her prison jumpsuit replaced with dignified civilian clothes. The evidence from Guardian Angel had forced the system to finally hear her story. I didn't just clean their houses, she explained, her voice growing stronger. I saw things. Children brought in late at night to private parties, documents left carelessly on desks, phone conversations about special merchandise, but who would believe a housekeeper? The jury sat transfixed as she detailed the systematic way the trafficking network had targeted vulnerable families. How they'd identify potential victims through charity organizations, using wealth and respectability as a shield for their true activities. When I started asking questions about missing children in our community, they decided I was a threat, she continued. But they were clever. They didn't just destroy me, they made an example of me. Show other domestic workers what happens when you see too much. Security footage from Guardian Angel corroborated everything. Meetings where her fate was decided, casual conversations about destroying her family to protect their secrets. The calculated cruelty was breathtaking. The hardest part wasn't prison. Maria's voice finally broke. It was knowing my children were alone, vulnerable to the same people who had framed me. Every night I prayed for an angel to protect them. The evidence of her framing was now irrefutable. Bank records showed payments to false witnesses. Police reports had been doctored. Even the judge who'd rushed her conviction was implicated in the conspiracy. But it was her description of the separation from her children that moved even hardened prosecutors to tears. Emma was screaming for me. Sammy, my brave boy, he promised he'd find me. Angels come when you need them most, I told them. I didn't know then that my employer, the man they made me appear to steal from, would become that angel. Photos from Guardian Angel showed the systematic dismantling of her life. Her small apartment being watched, her friends being intimidated, the careful construction of a false narrative that would make her disappearance unremarkable. They thought a poor immigrant mother would be easily forgotten, she said, steel entering her voice. They didn't understand that a mother's love can't be erased by prison walls or false accusations. The evidence expanded beyond her case. Other domestic workers came forward, sharing similar stories of witnessing suspicious activities and facing consequences for asking questions. A pattern emerged of wealthy employers using their staff's vulnerable status to silence them. We were invisible to them, Maria explained. Just background noise in their mansions. That's why they spoke freely around us. Never thinking we would understand, remember, or dare to speak up. Her testimony connected decades of disappearances, showing how the network had exploited society's blind spots: immigrant communities, foster systems, domestic workers. All people whose voices were easily dismissed or silenced. When Mr. Blake found Sammy in his garden, he could have looked away like all the others, she said. Instead, he chose to see, to listen, to act. He lost everything because he refused to be blind. The most damning evidence came from recordings of her original interrogation. The pressure to confess, the threats against her children, the casual racism of officials who assumed her guilt based on her background. They told me no one would believe me over them, she recalled. That poor women like me disappear all the time. They were right about one thing: we do disappear, but sometimes we come back. Sometimes we find our voice, and sometimes we find angels who help us be heard. As she spoke, Guardian Angel continued its work, releasing evidence to media outlets worldwide. The story couldn't be buried this time. The truth was too big, too well documented, too powerful to deny. My children suffered because I dared to notice what was happening in those wealthy homes, Maria concluded, her dignity absolute. But their suffering will mean something. Because today we're not just invisible workers anymore. We're witnesses. And we will be heard. The grand jury's response was unprecedented. Indictments were issued within hours. Arrests began at the highest levels of society. The wall of silence that had protected the powerful for so long began to crumble. But for Maria, only one thing mattered. As she left the courthouse, her ankle monitor finally removed, a car waited to take her to her children. After 5 years of separation, a mother's prayers were about to be answered. "You were right," she told Ethan, who had arranged everything. "Sometimes angels wear expensive suits." He smiled, thinking of a boy's unwavering faith. "And sometimes they wear housekeeping uniforms and never stop fighting for their children." Guardian Angel's data release created a tsunami that swept through global power structures. The evidence was overwhelming, meticulously documented, and impossible to discredit. Major news networks ran 24-hour coverage as each new revelation proved more shocking than the last. "The scale is unprecedented," CNN reported. Over 3 decades of organized child trafficking, protected by some of the most prominent names in business, politics, and law enforcement. The network's sophistication was terrifying. They had used legitimate charities as fronts, prestigious boarding schools as processing centers, and private medical facilities as holding locations. Every layer of society had been compromised. They didn't just buy children, Davidson explained to federal prosecutors. They bought entire systems designed to make children disappear legally. Court orders, medical evaluations, adoption papers, all perfectly documented, all completely false. Sunshine Center was just one node in a vast web. Similar facilities existed worldwide, each protected by wealth and influence. Guardian Angel exposed them all, tracking money flows through thousands of shell companies and offshore accounts. "Look at the pattern," Harrison pointed out. Every time someone got close to exposing them, journalists, social workers, even police, they didn't just silence them. They destroyed them completely. Made examples of them. The public's reaction was explosive. Protests erupted outside implicated institutions. Social media blazed with calls for justice. Parents whose children had vanished years ago suddenly had answers, though many were too heartbreaking to bear. We've identified over 300 children currently in their system, FBI director announced. International task forces are coordinating recovery operations, but some we may never find. The powerful fought back desperately. News channels sympathetic to the network tried discrediting the evidence. Politicians called for investigations into the investigations. Legal teams filed injunction after injunction. But Guardian Angel had anticipated this. With each attack, it released more specific evidence targeting the attackers. The corruption was exposed layer by layer, like peeling an onion of evil. Your father was brilliant, MS. Chen told Ethan, reviewing the program's architecture. He designed it to be unstoppable once activated. Every attempt to shut it down triggers new releases. But the most damning evidence came from the network's own communications. Encrypted messages revealed casual discussions about inventory management and product quality. Children reduced to commodities in their twisted marketplace. These people, Maria whispered, reading transcripts. They didn't see our children as human. They saw them as luxury goods for the wealthy and powerful. The arrests began at dawn, coordinated across multiple countries. Judges, politicians, business leaders, people who had seemed untouchable were led away in handcuffs. Their carefully constructed facades crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. But the network's true horror lay in its normalization of evil. Regular staff meetings where child trafficking was discussed alongside quarterly reports. HR policies for handling special acquisitions. Employee bonuses tied to successful placements. They made it seem routine. A whistleblower testified, just another business operation. We processed paperwork, attended meetings, met quotas. All while children disappeared. Guardian Angel saved its most devastating revelations for last. Evidence emerged of contingency plans to eliminate witnesses, including children, if the network was ever exposed. The facilities holding Emma, Sammy, and others had been part of this plan. They were going to make them all disappear, Harrison reported grimly. Make it look like mass runaways or accidents, if we'd waited even a few more days. The world reeled as the full scope became clear. Respected institutions, charitable foundations, child protection services, all had been weaponized against the very children they claimed to protect. The system wasn't broken, Ethan realized. It was working exactly as they designed it. Every safeguard, every procedure, every regulation, all carefully crafted to facilitate their true purpose. But Guardian Angel had done more than expose evil. It had provided a roadmap for reform, identifying weak points in the system and suggesting specific changes to prevent future exploitation. Your father's last gift, Maria said softly. He gave us not just truth, but hope for change. As the evidence continued to cascade through the world's media, a simple truth emerged: the greatest evils don't always lurk in shadows. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, protected by wealth, respectability, and humanity's willingness to look away. The trials lasted months, but the verdicts came swiftly. Guardian Angel's evidence was irrefutable, and public outrage demanded justice. Victoria Wells was the first to fall, receiving multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. Your Honor, she said at her sentencing, finally breaking her silence, we only gave them what they wanted: children made to order for those who could afford them. The real criminals are still in their boardrooms, their penthouses. But she was wrong. Guardian Angel's evidence reached everywhere, sparing no one. Werner's network of corrupt judges and officials crumbled. Corporate executives who had treated children as commodities faced their own reckonings. Today marks the largest human trafficking bust in history, the Attorney General announced. Over 200 indictments, 40 countries involved, and most importantly, 317 children rescued. Maria's exoneration was particularly sweet. The judge who had rushed her conviction now faced charges himself. Her record was expunged, and the state's formal apology came with substantial compensation. Money doesn't erase 5 years of separation from my children, she told reporters, but it will fund scholarships for other children at risk. Something good should come from this pain, and the reforms began immediately. Child welfare systems worldwide underwent massive overhauls. New oversight committees were established with positions reserved for former foster children and parents who had fought the system. The walls that protected predators will now protect children, Ethan announced at the opening of the Blake Martinez Children's Advocacy Center. Every child deserves angels in their corner. International laws were strengthened. Private adoption regulations tightened. The legitimate agencies and social workers who had fought against corruption for years finally found support for their efforts. But the most satisfying justice came in smaller moments. The reunion of families torn apart, the recovery of children thought lost forever, the healing that began as truth finally overcame power. Kadir emerged from hiding to testify, his evidence helping shut down trafficking routes across 3 continents. His daughter, once used to control him, now helped other rescued children adjust to freedom. The greatest victory, he said, watching children play safely in the advocacy center's garden, is not in punishing evil, but in preventing it from happening again. The corrupt system that had protected predators for decades was dismantled piece by piece. Guardian Angel's final protocol ensured transparency, releasing evidence of any attempted cover-ups or interference with reforms. "Your father would be proud," Davidson told Ethan during the final trials. "He died trying to expose this. You finished what he started." Werner's sentencing was particularly poignant. The prosecutor who had threatened children now faced justice in the same courts he had corrupted. The greatest crime, the judge told him, was not just in trafficking children, but in destroying faith in the systems meant to protect them. Your sentence reflects both. As the last major trials concluded, a new era of child protection emerged. The walls that had hidden corruption now supported healing. The power that had enabled abuse was redirected to prevention. Justice isn't just about punishment, Ethan reflected at the final press conference. It's about changing systems that allowed injustice to flourish. It's about making sure no child ever has to wait in a garden, hoping for angels to appear. The evidence from Guardian Angel was preserved, a permanent reminder of what happens when society looks away from evil. But more importantly, it became a blueprint for protection, ensuring the same systems could never be corrupted again. "We've learned," Maria said, standing beside Ethan at the sentencing of the last major defendant, "that justice doesn't always wear a judge's robes or carry a badge. Sometimes it wears expensive suits. Sometimes it wears housekeeping uniforms. Sometimes it just looks like people who refuse to be blind." As the gavel fell one final time, the long journey from that snowy night in Ethan's garden reached its culmination. Justice had been served, not just for Sammy and Emma, but for countless others who had suffered in silence. The day Maria walked free, snow was falling again in New York. Emma and Sammy waited in Ethan's penthouse garden, the same place where their journey had begun 1 year ago. When their mother appeared, time seemed to stop. "Miss Angelus," Maria whispered, opening her arms. The children ran to her, colliding in a tangle of tears and laughter. 5 years of separation dissolved in a single embrace. Emma, who had been nearly silent since her rescue, found her voice. "Mama, I never forgot you. Even when they tried to make me forget everything, I remembered your stories about angels." Sammy, still protecting his sister despite his own tears, added, "I told her you'd find us. That angels always keep their promises." Maria held them tighter, looking over their heads at Ethan, who stood back watching the reunion. "Some angels wear expensive suits," she said softly. The healing began slowly. Nightmares still came, but now they had each other to chase away the darkness. Emma gradually emerged from her shell, her laughter returning like spring after winter. Sammy's limp improved with proper medical care, though he insisted it made him uniquely qualified to help other kids with challenges. The penthouse transformed from Ethan's solitary fortress into a real home. Maria insisted on cooking, filling the once sterile kitchen with the sense of her childhood. Family dinners became sacred time, where stories and dreams were shared freely. "We should make it official," Ethan suggested one evening, watching the family he'd found by accident and kept by choice. "If you want, that is, all of you." The adoption ceremony was small but profound. The judge, one of the few who had fought corruption within the system, smiled as she made them legally what they had become naturally, a family. "Sometimes," she said, "the best families are the ones we choose." Emma insisted everyone wear something blue, the color of angel wings, she explained seriously. Sammy, ever practical, added superhero capes to their outfits, because families are like superheroes, stronger together. Maria's eyes shone with happy tears as she signed the papers. From housekeeper to mother of three, she laughed. God works in mysterious ways. "For," Sammy corrected, pointing to Ethan. "He needs a family too." The garden where it all began became their special place. Emma started a butterfly garden, saying the transformations reminded her that change could be beautiful. Sammy built hideouts among the plants, but now they were for fun, not fear. "Look," Emma said one snowy evening, almost exactly a year after their reunion. She pointed to their reflections in the penthouse windows: mother, children, and the billionaire who had lost everything only to gain what mattered most. "What do you see?" Maria asked. "Angels," Sammy said simply. "All of us. Different kinds, but still angels." Ethan looked at his unlikely family: the wrongly imprisoned mother, whose strength never wavered, the boy whose faith had torn down his walls, the girl who had found her voice again, and himself, transformed from lonely billionaire to something far richer, a father. "You know," he said, pulling them all close as snowflakes danced in the garden lights, "I spent my life building walls to keep the world out. Never realized I was really waiting for the right people to let in." Emma leaned against him. "Angels don't need walls, Daddy. They need family." And in that moment, as snow fell softly on his garden of second chances, Ethan Blake finally understood what real wealth meant. It wasn't in the penthouses or power he'd lost, but in the simple word his daughter had used: Daddy. 5 years later, the Blake Martinez Children's Advocacy Center had become a global model for child protection. The penthouse garden, where it all began, now bloomed year-round, a rooftop sanctuary for children finding their way back to light. "Every child deserves angels," read the center's mission statement, written in both English and Spanish. Below it, a wall of photos showed success stories: families reunited, children rescued, hope restored. Sammy, now 15, had become a peer counselor for new arrivals. His slight limp, which he refused to see as a disability, made him especially effective with children who felt different or broken. "Someone once told me that angels come in all forms," he'd tell them. "Sometimes they limp, sometimes they're scared, but they never give up on each other." Emma, at 12, ran art therapy sessions. Her butterfly garden had expanded across the entire rooftop, a living metaphor for transformation. Children who couldn't speak about their trauma could paint their feelings among the flowers. "Color helps heal the darkness," she explained to visitors, just like family helps heal the heart. Maria had become the center's director of family services, her experience on both sides of the system making her uniquely qualified to help others navigate the path to healing. "We don't just rescue children," she would say. "We rescue hope." Ethan, though no longer a billionaire, had found wealth beyond measure. The man who once built walls now specialized in tearing them down, using his business experience to help other organizations protect children worldwide. The family still lived in the penthouse, but it was different now. Children's laughter echoed through once silent halls. The garden hosted regular picnics for families in the program. Even the security system had been repurposed to protect rather than isolate. On the 5th anniversary of their official adoption, they gathered in their special place, the garden where angels had first appeared. "Remember when you found me here?" Sammy asked, now nearly as tall as Ethan. "Best security breach ever," Ethan smiled, watching Emma teach her mother butterfly release ceremonies. The garden had become more than a sanctuary, it was a symbol of their journey. The maple tree where Sammy had waited now bore a plaque, "Where Angels Land." "You know what I've learned," Emma said, releasing a newly emerged butterfly. "Angels aren't just about rescue, they're about believing things can change." Maria nodded, her eyes bright with happy tears. And family isn't just about blood, it's about who stays when the storms come. As twilight painted the sky in colors no penthouse view could buy, Ethan looked at his family, the brave boy who had crashed through his walls, the resilient girl who had found her voice, the strong woman who had never lost faith, and the man he had become because of them. "We should put it in the mission statement," Sammy suggested, "that sometimes angels wear expensive suits, and sometimes they wear housekeeping uniforms, but they always wear love." The butterfly Emma had released circled once around them before soaring higher, catching the last rays of sun on its wings. Below, the city stretched endlessly, still full of children waiting for rescue. But now there was hope and angels of all kinds ready to answer. "To new beginnings," Ethan said, holding his family close, "and to angels in all their forms." The garden, where a lonely boy had once waited for rescue, had become a launching pad for countless other rescues. The walls that had once imprisoned a heart now embraced a mission. And the family that fate had assembled proved that sometimes the greatest miracles wear the simplest disguises. They were all angels now, in their own ways, and their work was just beginning. The end. Dear amazing viewers, if this story touched your heart, please consider supporting our storytelling journey. Your subscription is like a warm embrace, encouraging us to create more meaningful content. Don't forget to hit that like button and share with loved ones who might need a reminder that angels exist in many forms. Share your thoughts and emotions in the comments below. How did this story resonate with you? What touched you most? Let's build a community of hope and inspiration together. Every like, share, and comment helps spread this message of love and redemption. Thank you for being part of our family.